Shalom and ahoy to our viewers and listeners. No, that's why I said ahoy, because now we have. So welcome to Mitchadshim.
We have a pirate. So
no, we have. Wait a second, Lalu, you're ruining Eliyahu. You're ruining all the surprise. So that's the way. The reason that I'm speaking in English is because we have a special guest. Rozálie Kašparová. She's an urban planner, right? Architect, yeah, from the Czech Republic. That's why I started with ahoy. Ahoy is the Czech greeting, right?
Yeah.
Is it really?
Yeah, that's true.
Yes,
yeah,
it's a great greeting. Yes.
Like so, in the Czech Republic, everyone's a pirate? Is that
there is no sea. By the way, there is no sea in the Czech Republic. And with
I don't even have. Now I get it. They want to be pirates, but they don't have an ocean.
So we have a big tradition of summer canoeing in the rivers. So maybe that's something with that.
And with us, Eliyahu Lav, our,
Hi, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, as always, you're here, and great to have you here.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, and today we're going to talk about urban renewal in Prague, because Rozálie, you are the part of the, you know what, introduce yourself. That would be much easier if you introduce yourself.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Rozálie Kašparová, and I'm an architect and urban designer, not an urban planner. That's a little bit different scale.
Oh, sorry.
That's totally fine. People mix it up, and I get that because we don't get that much press and I would say attention from the media, so people don't know the right terminology, and that's completely right. And it's our task to explain ourselves what we actually do. Mm-hmm. So I work in Prague Institute of Planning and Development past 5 years. And I studied architecture in Prague and then urban design in Sweden. And then I came back because I felt that the public sector needs people to engage and needs architects to work in public sector, not just designing houses. So I try to do my best to help the city to flourish and develop in the sustainable way.
So what is the difference between urban design and urban planning? If you can summarize.
It's really just about the scale. If we talk about urban planning, it's like you work with the city as a whole and you don't go too much detail. Urban design, it's really about designing new districts, for example, or the urban renewal you want to talk about. It's mostly, I would say, the urban design issue, because it's the scale when you design blocks and new districts and streets and parks and all the spaces in between, how the city works, how the districts work together within the whole city. So it's a little bit more to the detail. And then architecture, of course, is designing the particular buildings within the districts, within the pattern you design as an urban designer. So then you have, and it's also very a lot of times forget about, especially in Czech Republic, you have landscape architecture, and landscape architects deal with the in-between spaces and the landscape and parks, but not just parks, it's real the in-between and streets and everything else, because cities are not just buildings, streets, squares, and parks. Mm-hmm. Because if you think about it, really most of the city is the everything else, but these specific spaces and places. So that's also what we as urban designer needs to deal with, and how to connect these in-between spaces and how to renew them or let them be as they are. So we create the biodiversity and also excitement in the city, because you don't want to always be in the managed parks or managed streets, because it's not that much fun in the end.
Mm-hmm. So what are the main... Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to start digging into the city renewal project. So basically, we in Israel, we are right now in the midst of a major process. It's been going around for about 15 years. It caught steam for the past, I would say, 10, and even more steam in the past 5 years, where we call it city renovation, but it is a city renewal. But technically, that was a byproduct of what we're doing. Basically, the whole idea was city reinforcement, or reinforcement of the country for two reasons. One is we're sitting on a very active tectonic region where you have the Asian and the African meet, many earthquakes. And the second is, as sadly everyone knows, Israel is in a constant state of war, I would say, just flaring once in a while. And so and most of the buildings, or we'd even say old buildings that have been built before 1980s, are not suited for these kind of situations. They will not withstand an earthquake. It doesn't even have to be a massive earthquake, even a strong earthquake, they will not withstand. We have it in the history of our country. 100 years ago, an entire city, the city of Tzfat, was basically erased due to an earthquake. And it's by geologists saying we are due about 10 years ago for another one. Second of all, it's the missiles coming. So we're reinforcing, and the plan is we are either knocking down entire neighborhoods or portions of neighborhoods, 5, 6, 10 buildings, and completely renewing it with new infrastructure, new kindergarten, parks, etc. Or we take a single building, we reinforce it, we add safe rooms, and the investor gets extra units on the roof, and that way subsidized. So this is what we have here, okay? In a nutshell, what we're doing. I want to hear how city renovation happens in Prague. What's the motivation behind it? How is it done? Who is funding it? Like, because you're coming from a very different perspective, I'm guessing, from a very different. It is not the missiles or the earthquakes which is forcing you guys to do city renovation, right?
Totally. That's what I just wanted to really say. Our strategic basics are totally different. We are very fine and settled within the geology and the geography within the middle of Europe, and no earthquakes, literally no earthquakes in Czech Republic. Maybe some like small ones. Geologists maybe.
No major wars for the last 70 something years, right?
Yeah, we kind of ended that with the Second World War, and then we had communism though. So it's and that's actually a lot of the urban renewal is connected to the city that was developed in the 40 years of communism or socialism, and how to deal with these spaces now.
Wait, let's just, for our listeners, let's just give them a quick historic background, if you can, about Czech Republic, communist from till?
Yeah, from 1948 to 1989, and we were Czechoslovakia at that point. Most listeners probably would know. And then we split in 1993 to Czech Republic and Slovakia, but we are democratic since 1989. So we had a couple of years ago, we have a big celebration of the democracy, right? We have. Not that democracy would be that easy to easy to maintain though.
Well, I'm going to just look for our viewers for a picture of what Soviet architects looks like, so they could see the horror of. Yeah. It ain't pretty. I could say that.
No, I wouldn't. No, I don't really want to demonize the. No, I wouldn't call it Soviet, but just the socialist architecture, or just the architecture that was built during this period of time, because it was built all over Europe. It's not about the communism or socialism. It's just the modernistic architecture that actually started flaring in the Western Europe. So it's the modernistic city housing estates, and
really you would say it's just the modernist, but not the communist, because the modernist does have its outlines that you can see in the communist, but with the communist, it was, we will build what we have to. Like, it's what we need, the minimum needed in order to sustain a family in a very tight
No, but I think
modernistic,
I think that Rozálie has a good point in that, because I think that it's something that more related to the bigger picture, which is like modern approach, right? It's like something that
Exactly. It was based on the actually hygienic
clean line
points of view, because the modernistic cities started to being built that the houses are far away from each other to get light into every room, and etc. So that's something that the block pattern in the old town, all the old towns, we have a lot of them in Prague, that can ensure. But now we know also the light all day in your windows. It's not also the most important thing. But
how do you deal with this? How do you deal with this like this modern or communist house buildings there? Is it related to the renewal, to the urban renewal there? Are you demolished this?
Would you mind giving me sharing so I could show whoever's viewing and not listening, they could see it? And sorry for
go ahead. Yeah, sure.
For interrupting.
It's somehow I would say the urban renewal goes in Prague in different levels. So far, like even till this point, most of the new buildings and new districts being built are in the outskirts. This is not very Czech. You need to put there
very communist.
Yeah, it's very like brutalist, but this is not how Czech housing estates look like. If you put there Jižní, like South City Prague,
you go ahead, put it on yours, and you can share yours, so we can do a better job at it. Show us what's going on there.
Yeah,
so people understand.
I mean, we know what we're talking about. It's a very, very clean line. Very, I would say.
Basically, we have it here in Israel.
Yeah, we have this kind of buildings in Israel. So I think that maybe I think that we know what we're talking about. And again, it's a podcast, so not a lot of.
Right, but you know me.
I don't think that we need to share the thing now, because it's like less.
Okay, so forget it. I'm gonna just let her. She'll show.
We know what it looks. It's like a block of buildings.
It's block structure. But it's not scary. It's definitely scary. And what is very important, because in Europe it often has a
Eliyahu, can you stop the sharing? If you can stop the sharing.
Yeah, I stopped the sharing.
Yes. I'm giving it a try.
Mm-hmm.
In Europe, it has a lot of bad connotations, these modernistic housing estates, but in Prague, more than nearly 40% of people live in housing estates, and it's not like no-go zones, or it's not run-down neighborhoods. It's actually very much flourishing, and we are happy living there, because you have a lot of space around, you have a proximity to nature, and still a proximity to metro and the tube, so you are in 15-20 minutes in the center of Prague. So, but a lot of the urban renewal, I would say just development, it's not about renewal really, has been taking places in these outskirts, because that was kind of perceived as the only places where it's easy to build, because there's a lot of space, because the modernistic approach wasn't understood and was frowned upon, because it was so connected to the communist times. So in the 90s and in the early millennium, a lot of the development happened, and till now, because we have, once you get, you have a vision of building on a plot, it takes like 10 to 15 years to start actually building in Prague. We have a lot time takes to get the building approval. So till now, we still build in these neighborhoods, which are basically done, but some people feel there are so much empty space you can build in there. So that's one type of urban development that's happening in Prague, and we start to stop it past a few years. Since the IPR was established, I must say, our institute is quite new. It's not even 10 years.
For our listeners, and actually for me, what is that?
Prague Institute of Planning and Development, the place I work, and it's run by the city hall, so it's like a city-driven institute. And since we were based, it's not even it's founded. It's not even 10 years. We are now the only ones who are establishing this, how actually the city should be developed, and some strategic point of view. Because till that point,
if I get it till now, okay, the picture. So we have Second World War, okay, with last war to majorly affect the country. Communists come in, okay, communists go out. They build a whole lot in the modernist era. okay, modernist development, Czechoslovakia, then comes Czech Republic. Development is happening outside the city. Old part of Prague is old. It's I think protected by UNESCO as well, right?
It's the biggest. I think it's the biggest UNESCO heritage in the world.
Like it's a heritage site, and development happens outside in the outskirts of the city.
Yeah.
But then 10 years ago, you guys come in, okay, and you say, halt, okay, we want to keep the open spaces, and then what do you do?
Exactly. We need to connect the city back to the landscape, because we also started to saying there is a landscape and there is a city, but it's not like that. The city is built on the landscape, and we need to reconnect with it. And that's what happens. And I think that's what you need to be really careful about, that if you start building without this in mind, and you're building new districts and new neighborhoods and tearing some down and rebuilding them new, you often kind of just think about the building structure and where to put the streets and parks, but not how to connect the landscape, which is undergoing everywhere. So, sorry. So that's the main thing we are now trying to go back to, even though it's still not much understood yet. But we are starting the conversation. And so we said we need to stop building in the outskirts and to the landscape around, to the fields. We need to be more effective, because there's still so much space in the city where we can build, and that's true.
So take me a little bit further into the process itself. Are you looking right now on open spaces, on underdeveloped spaces within the city, or you're taking an area where the housing is 1-2 stores and say, hey, we can use this better, knock it down, let's build?
No, we don't do that. We kind of, we really look in the empty spaces, because Prague has still a lot of them, because during the 50 years afterward, we didn't really build because it was still in use, in the now old industrial plots. So we've got a lot of brownfields we can build in. And in general, the capacity within Prague is still quite high to be able to build. Then let's not talk about the quality of the building yet, because there's also it's being very simplified that the only thing we need to do is build more flats, because then they will get cheaper. That is not how it really works. So that's another issue. We are starting to understand now. We understood 10 years ago we have to stop building in the fields and in the landscape in the outskirts. And now we're starting to understand that we need to ensure that what we are building actually is inclusive and is sustainable. Because otherwise because Prague is, as it's in the center of Prague, is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Sorry, guys. It is.
You're right about that. You're right.
Sorry, the whole world. But it is.
And I feel like I'm in a good spot. Okay, so we're not competing; we're together.
Great. So it's very much looked at as an investor opportunity as well. And buying a flat or a whole house in Prague, it is a good commodity to get money in a few years. So for investors, it's very attractive, and that's what we've been dealing with past 20 years, and it's mainly past 5 years that a lot of foreigners buying flats or
isn't it
big
changing?
houses.
But isn't it changing the way that the city is developed when people from outside change?
I gotta warn you, it's one of Sinai's favorite topics is coming and saying, wait, what's with the gentrification?
No, I'm just asking. Because
it's true. It's true, and it's we are now in the phase that we realize, hey, gentrification is really an issue. It's really happening, and it affected a few districts in Prague already.
How do you deal with this topic there?
We are just starting. We just discussed it yesterday with my colleagues that we need to establish actually a common name, a strategy how to deal with it. We deal with it in particular projects. What IPR do, we do a lot of I work in the Office of Public Space, so we do the public space, the parks, and the in-between spaces. And we really try to create parks and public space, which is not gentrificator in the end. But of course, it's in here.
Something that we've been doing here. I think it's in the past 5 to 7 years since we're doing these major projects where we're knocking down, you'd say, 200, 300 houses, or not houses, apartments in 5, 6 buildings, you must now, for every development project like this of city renovation, you have to have what we call a social advisor, someone who comes and gives an entire plan of the social environment of that part of the city, of those neighborhoods. What's the income, schooling, religious, and only then can you start actually do planning. Because if you plan, I don't know, an expensive park, but the people living there can't afford, or you plan a shopping mall and the people there can't afford that mall, you've done nothing. You need to be, okay, you get the point.
Exactly, totally.
So what's the principle there? What's the principle or guide that guides you in urban renewal in Prague? Other like any lists or any...
one of the principles or the basics that we are starting with is that in the 90s, and that's really important to understand, that after the socialist and communist, not democratic system, when the 90s came, the mindset of the people who started ruling the country and ruling the cities were so different from what it's now, because they reacted to the not freedom and to the socialist system before. So they were all into the capitalism is the key, and is the key that solves the city development as well. So we sold all our flats, which was based in the communist time that nobody owns nothing. So all the flats were public, and we sold them all in the 90s, and we are selling them till this point. Now we kind of stopped and said we can't anymore, but we sold most of the flats and we sold most of the land to the private sector. So we have...
Why did you stop? What was wrong about it?
Well, wrong about it is that we don't have enough regulations and enough or just motivation for the private sector to develop this land.
So they buy it and they sit on it?
Often they sit on it and they wait till they can start building on it. And if they start building on it, we don't have that much means how to regulate how the development is going to be. Or we didn't have till...
Is it private owned mostly by foreigners or by local Czechs?
Mostly by Czech investors, local firms and developers. But the thing is that we need to, most of the urban renewal, I don't want to call it renewal really, I think it's not a really great word for what's happening in Prague.
Development.
But just urban development, it's ruled by the private sector, because it's private land and the private investors. And Prague only can kind of say the basic rules. We have the zoning plan, which we are now past a few years creating a new one, which is called a metropolitan plan, which deals very differently.
Basically, you guys are basically just starting a process of what we had here for, I would say, the past 100 years. Like even before our country was established, there was already zoning of everything, bureaucracy of how and where you should build, an entire city plan going down to an entire country plan, and then going down to the city plan, where you build, what you build. You're saying this is something that is being done just now?
No. We have the zoning plan for the communists, the socialists were very good at this, this planning, the whole scale planning. So we have the plan, and we renewed the plan in the 90s, but it just says very basic regulations. It says what you can build. So is it housing, or is it offices, or is it industry, or is it a park, and some capacities, let's say. So how much, but it doesn't say how high, and it doesn't say the character of the neighborhood. So you can totally build, you have a block structure, and you can just start building there point buildings, because nobody till
what's wrong about it?
2016, nobody said that
what's wrong with that?
Well, then you start, that's the thing, if you leave for everybody to build how they want and what they want without broader context of the city, then you start losing the connection to the landscape, to the history, and to the context of what's already being built. So
I agree with you on that one.
Well,
I've learned,
cannot agree that it's true.
What I've learned is the country, a lot of time, the municipality, they mean well.
You mean the state?
The state, they mean well. But bottom line is, they don't do a good job. Meaning, it's the less...
You're talking to the municipality right now, Eliyahu, so maybe...
I know, I apologize. And it's no offense, but take an example. You think Gaudi could have built the Sagrada La Familia if he had regulations? That would have never rose. Okay, if they would have told him you got to drill straight lines and lamps, that would never happen. Like
it's like no. You're like crooking the principles. The thing is, the regulation. The regulation says here in this spot, like there will be a big square, and in the middle of the square we want a new cathedral. That's what the regulation says. And when it's about cathedral, it's such a specific. It's like the most specific building you can build in or like any religion. Mm-hmm. Any religion connected building. It's like the only, there are, and especially this size, there are such a few and tiny number of them that of course there are no regulations to the specific buildings. But the regulation needs to say that around this cathedral, for example, you have a plan how the neighborhood around will develop. You cannot let just the land being developed by itself means by the
what
owners.
What about by the need? Like, so investor doesn't come with an agenda of I want to build ugly or pretty. I want to build whatever people want and whatever will sell. I'm bringing the capitalist perspective here because I live right now in Israel. It's extremely overregulated. In Jerusalem, if I could flip the camera, I'm not going to flip the camera because I hates when I do that. He's like, there's listeners, not everyone's viewing. So in Jerusalem, they limit about everything there is to building. They tell you what kind of stone you got to put outside.
I guess
now
in preserving, when you preserve building. No, but I think that when you preserve,
they tell you now how should the lamp outside the building, the lamps outside the building, what they should look like. Okay, and you can get fined if the lighting is not correct.
I'm guessing it's in the old city of Prague. It's the same, right? What's the colors of the right? So I'm guessing that.
But that's when you're doing preservation. I'm saying you come to develop a new project, and right now in Israel, and you're saying it's the same in Prague. It takes us about 5-6 years of regulation before we actually start building. Just running permits, getting approved, and every single time they're like, "Oh no, you don't know about regulations."
So wait a second, Eliyahu, wait a second. So how do you deal? Rozálie, how do you deal with this? For example, this capitalist approach, or when the entrepreneur or developers are trying to build like new things in the city, what is your approach to this, and what is the challenges that you're facing in urban renewal in Prague? Basically.
Yeah, the challenges, I think, let's not call it regulations, let's call it rules. No, seriously, because I think it's really about the wording you use that it can be motivating or unmotivating. And of course, in some like the historical centers and strike, that's basically regulation, and it's fine, and everybody's okay with that because we agreed as a society, in the heritage, there's a big value that we want to preserve.
That's like what make Prague or Jerusalem in Prague, right? Let's put it
exactly. But that's aside. But what's happening, and that's also why the building approval is so long, is that we haven't still, like a few years ago, created rules how to build well, and that means every developer they have no starting point. They don't know what to. They don't know because they don't usually hire like great urban architects and urban designers that would create these contexts well for them. But they just so they don't know what are the starting points of their development, and they have some to be the most effective. They have some like type of buildings that they use in a lot of places. It's not always the case, but they can just say, okay, so here we have the capacity of this plot is this, so we can build this amount of space, build up amount of space. And they kind of could have done it in any way possible. But then if like every pattern of the city and quite small patterns, because if the plots are usually quite small, became totally different. And I'm not talking design wise, I'm not talking how the facades look, but I'm talking about the pattern and how the public space look, and how then you kind of, the streets get blurred, the orientation in the city gets blurred. And that's what in the end causes that you don't feel then you don't feel good in the city, because your brain needs to get what's happening outside. That's good when you know how the cathedral looks, because it has like archetype, how the hospital looks, because you kind of understand how the city hall looks. And there are these like landmarks in the city that even though you've never been there, you kind of perceive them. Oh, look, this is an important building, this is an important building. What we can do is that we change the importance and the hierarchy of the buildings, and then you build, for example, like very like crazy special just apartment buildings, because then it gets distracted. It's fine if it's one case, two cases, but when it gets too scattered and everybody's kind of try to shine on their plot, then you don't get the orientation.
I would love that. I would love to see that actually.
Yeah,
I would want to see a city rise from the ground with zero regulations. I bet you. I bet you a city like that
there are many cities that has been happening.
I'm not talking about Ethiopia. Okay.
I think that even in the Western world, you have cities like that. I think that even in California, there was like one of these cities that just emerge from just entrepreneur. I think, I think that...
No, this is still, you're saying they emerged from entrepreneurs, meaning somebody built a city. Yeah. I'm saying go back to the time where someone would build a house and then a neighbor would come next to him and just build a house next to him. And then they would see, oh, look, there's traffic. Let's open a store. And they open a store.
No, but I don't think it works like that. I think it's a very naive, it's a very naive way.
It doesn't work like that anymore.
Yeah, it's a very naive way.
I know it doesn't work like that anymore, but think what we're doing is we are building cities now in a way that we think will serve, okay? But we're building it unnaturally. There's a thing that you said earlier.
What do you mean unnaturally? Cities are unnatural.
I'll tell you.
Cities are not created in the nature, It's like something.
No, it is. It is. Housing is very nature. Housing, caves, it's very nature.
You don't live in a cave. You live in a city, and
you're building a nest. It's basically a nest. But whatever. You said before, you already had the districts, and now we're learning here in Israel and around the world about the problems of that, where you're saying this would be for offices, this would be for housing, this would be for infrastructure, and then we're saying, wait. This is not the way cities should be. No one has to go into his car and commute to his office. Why isn't his office in the next building on the third floor and even in the same building? And this is a lot of time what happens when planners come in and they think they know better and they build the way they see it, 2D from the top, where colors are easy. And they're like, okay, let's do this blue, this green, red over there, because it makes sense. It's harder to picture a city in 3D when you're saying, this amount of offices, kindergarten will be on the second floor, first floor, let's put stores and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think there's a balance.
What you just named, I totally agree with, and that's a different issue. So the thing is, it's like, that's what we are now creating, the new metropolitan plan. It doesn't work with the colors anymore. Because that's what I said. If you only, and that's what the current plan is working with, and the plan used to work with during the communist time, even though there was no private property. So the kind of what the city decided that was being built. But when you mixed with like the socialist system with the capitalism building strategy, then it just makes no sense. Because you have so little rules, and the only rule was actually the capacity and the function, which is like, well, that's not what's
very wide range.
It's like exactly. So that you have so much more ranges. You have the character of the districts. Character. So what's the urban pattern? What's exactly how the streets work? Because in the modernistic city, the streets work very differently than in the block city or in the medieval city. And all of these streets are good. Some of them are a little bit better with orientation, but the potential and like the good and the bad in all of these typologies. But you need to respect the typology you're building in. And of course, and that's what, for example, our new metropolitan is doing. It's saying, hey, the character of this area is this, the character of this area is this. If you're building in between them, you need to reflect what's the character of the urban districts around, and you need to respect the height regulations that we established, because you can't all of a sudden start building like basically, one high building in the middle.
If we leave, and this is something I have to agree on, so investors.
But please summarize, because we have very limited time right now. So yeah.
The interest of an investor is not the city, it's not the people who live there in the city, it's basically his pocket. And if we leave it to them, they will maximize their profit. It doesn't have to be that they will build a good city.
Exactly. You see, you're starting to agree with me.
Great. Okay.
Listen, coming from a country where regulation, so we are basically bound right now.
We need to summarize. So just in one sentence. No, just summarize it. Just
so I'm saying right now, so there's got to be a balance between the capitalist approach of the city will balance itself to what we have right now in Israel, which you can tell I'm coming from. I've bobbled up a lot about it, where a project takes 7 to 10 years to complete, just because 90 or 80% of it is just stuck in regulations, where they would stop an entire project because
no time. So anyway, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. It was great to have you here, and have a great day in Prague.
Thank you. I'm really excited. I'm really curious what would be the ending result, because cutting this will be a challenge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for inviting me.